Coming up next, vaccine distribution around the world. Who's winning the vaccine race? What's in store for the winner? Joining us for the discussion is Michael Hetmenick, Head of Business Development for Sequentum, a low-code intelligent process automation company that specializes in web data extraction. The Sequentum enterprise software platform automates 95% of the process for capturing or processing large volumes of unstructured data from websites, document repositories, and other unstructured data sources, with the ultimate in quality, data operation, and compliance controls. Also joining us today is Neil Seaman, CEO of RIWI, which stands for Real-Time Interactive Worldwide Intelligence. RIWI provides access to fast-changing consumer and citizen sentiment across 229 countries and territories, over 80 languages, and 1.6 billion interviewees and counting. RIWI breaks through the noise to find the truth about what people really think, want, and observe by reaching the most diverse audiences, including the disengaged and quiet voices who do not typically answer surveys or express their views on social media. And now, please welcome your moderator, BattleFin Senior Vice President of Sales, Alex Perlin.
Welcome, everyone. Our topic for this panel is vaccine distribution around the world. So just to sort of set the topic, before I introduce Michael and Neil, I just found yesterday in the New York Times article, more than 678 million vaccine doses have been administered worldwide. It's equal to 8.8 doses, though, for every 100 people. So there's already a stark gap between vaccination programs in different countries and, with many yet to report a single dose, sadly. So while vaccine does remain relatively scarce globally, most countries have focused their early vaccination efforts on priority groups like the clinically vulnerable and people in their 60s, 70s, and older, and frontline workers, certainly. Israel is vaccinating its population faster than any other country. I've certainly spoken with various clients globally, and it's like France, for example, is seriously depressed over there, I would say, with everything still on lockdown. So along those lines, we've also just heard about AstraZeneca's COVID vaccine in Europe being, the Netherlands is stopping its rollout of that vaccine, et cetera. So we are certainly at the center of the largest global vaccine drive in history, where speed and precision are the essence of beating this COVID-19 pandemic. And today we want to focus on back to the financial world and what that is telling us, how this vaccine rollout is affecting various different areas. Certainly, recent studies have also calculated the economic cost that countries could incur should they continue to pursue an uncoordinated approach to the vaccine distribution. That the world risks global GDP losses in 2020 alone of as much as 9.2 trillion US dollars, I believe. So I want to pivot and introduce Michael and Neil. We have Neil, who's the CEO of RIWI, and Michael, Head of Business Development at Sequentum, here to discuss the various ways their data can show what's happening with GDP growth and economic impacts during this vaccination rollout. So as I turn to Michael and Neil, we were discussing certain projects that you have been working on recently, just so we can get a sense of your audience. Neil, if you want to start, maybe we can just discuss what you've been working on recently.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Michael. Thank you to the team here. I mean, big picture, RIWI's in the business of inclusive survey data collection in all countries of the world and digital ad test data collection in all countries of the world. So, recent projects that we're very sensitive to and ongoing relate to, in the United States, working with the CDC-funded Global Health Crisis Coordination Center, understanding pockets of what we call vaccine deliberation as opposed to vaccine hesitancy, to really understand the factors and causes for people deliberating over the vaccine in order to optimize uptake across the United States. But we're looking at this phenomena globally, understanding economic fragility in different nations, very concerned, less so about the G7 in the United States than I am about countries in Latin America, for example. This pandemic comes from the Greek pandemos. It's a global in nature, and we have to be sensitive to the endemic nature of this challenge going forth into the future. So really looking at everywhere in different parts of the world, how resilient different economies are, consumers are, and sometimes that behavior has a direct knock-on effect on US equities, especially in the case of US equities that depend on the Chinese consumer, the Chinese business owner. We've been really focusing on China since the beginning of this pandemic, and much earlier than that.
Actually, and that's a nice segue into you, Michael. I know you're focused on China as well and the GDP, but I know Sequentum provides web-based alternative data to many different financial institutions and governmental organizations. What demand are you seeing in the market for this data in this environment?
Sure. So thank you, Alex, and thank you, Neil. We have been seeing a giant pickup in the amount of requests for monitoring small, medium enterprise businesses, and we started to see clients asking for how does that data compare to vaccination rollout, infection rates, and other issues around pandemic reopening. So we've been looking at both the business reopenings, but also looking at things like behavior. So we've seen, we know that there's a huge difference in the GDP growth in China versus the United States right now. China is recovering at a rapid rate. Q4 increase in GDP in China was 6.5%. US was minus 2.4%. We're looking at this sort of data and what is the impact of a vaccination program where the vaccine isn't being pushed very hard in China until very recently. But the targets for China are to get 40% of the population vaccinated by the summer, and the target for the United States is to get 70% of the population vaccinated by the summer. So what's the impact of that vaccination level on infection rate, and how does that impact the economy and reopening? So
yeah.
What we're seeing is that in China, and Neil may disagree with me, but what our initial analysis of the data is showing that in China, the reopening is happening independent of the vaccine because of the social controls that they have in the system, whereas we don't have those social controls in the system in the United States. And so we're really reliant upon that vaccine. And then what does that mean going forward if there are variants, or if there is a new type of pandemic or virus that doesn't have an active vaccine? What's the impact of that potential risk to the American economy versus the Chinese economy? And given that China has been managing without a vaccine and without putting a lot of pressure on vaccination, it remains to be seen if it's just a speed bump for China and maybe a roadblock for the United States.
Right. Neil, can you give us a sense of the narratives you've seen play out in China, that are not getting attention, the attention they merit in the financial markets, perhaps?
Yeah, thank you, Alex. Thank you, Michael. I mean, to pick up on what Michael was saying, very different contexts in China and the United States. Really, since the early days of the pandemic, what we saw in China was high trust, continued high trust in the 88 to 90% zone, of course, with massive outliers in different regions of the country with respect to trust in public health authorities to educate and do the right things for the population. However, in China, deep-seated concern about vaccinations, largely due to historic challenges and controversies with respect to biotech-related vaccine rollout in the country. In the United States, very different, sort of much lower investment of trust in public health authorities, of course, highly variable. And this has been a changing dynamic. So in China, in the Western narrative, it's what I find is just generally speaking, it's kind of binary. Either China's doing really awful, they're in trouble, or things are really rosy. And the truth is sort of somewhere in between. There's been just a general sense that of resilience in China over the period of the pandemic, and it doesn't surprise us that things are rebounding quite quickly. There's pent-up consumer demand, which is affecting retail and other sectors. Of course, in the United States, there's a great deal of positive news that we're seeing in our economic indicators that we track on behalf of ourselves and financial institutions. The narratives we're tracing that I think are particularly interesting relate to retail, for example. Right now, one of the biggest signal to noise ratio discussions is sort of the forced labor boycott issue. To what extent does the Beijing message campaign truly hurt U.S. equities, U.S. retail? And, our historic data, whether it was with Apple and smartphones and other US-based consumer products, is that the Chinese really love those products. And despite what official Beijing may say about certain US-based products, especially if those US-based products are predominantly sold online, the general hypothesis is that it's tough to unhinge a powerful product. And Tesla, I think, is a good example of that. We're seeing robust continued support for Tesla across China, despite the surge in local market competitors.
Wow. Yeah, I think that sort of leads into, thank you both. I know Cisco is on your radar, Michael, right? So as we're trying to get actionable insights, for our buyers, maybe we can focus on re-engaging the whole services businesses. How fast is that going to recover? I know you guys are focused on those tickers as well.
Sure. Yeah. So Cisco, ticker SYY, not Cisco, the networking company. SYSCO, the food services company. So that company has seen a tremendous rebound in its stock price. It hit a low of around 35 in the middle of the pandemic, and now it's back up to its level high around $81 a share. And that company is directly impacted by a study that we've been doing on restaurant diners. So we have been studying the impact of restaurant diners. How has the change in restaurant dining, the number of guests eating at a restaurant on a given night, how is that change happening? And so for Cisco, you see this is the market already knows the price that has priced in the changes to Cisco and the sentiment that people have. They're going back out to restaurants again. We're seeing recovery. We're nowhere near pre-pandemic levels, but we are seeing recovery there. And so there's a lot of optimism. And then the question becomes, how much of a proxy for human behavior, for consumer behavior, is this restaurant dining data that we've got? So we have the restaurant dining data, and we start combining that with other data sets. So a simple comparison that we did was just looking at what's the restaurant dining rate versus the vaccination rate in each state in the United States, and then how does that compare to infection rates? And so far, the vaccinations haven't been around long enough to really penetrate that data and to really create statistical correlations between those data sets. But our sense is that over time there will be data that can be correlated there. So if we look at a couple of examples, New Mexico is a great example where the data looks great. No one's eating at restaurants, lots of people getting vaccinated, very low infections. But then you take another state like Nevada, not doing very well in vaccinations, doing incredible recovery in restaurant dining. So a lot of restaurant diners, but the same infection rate as New Mexico. So what's happening there? Is it out-of-state travelers that are getting the virus in Las Vegas and leaving and getting tested when they get back home? That's sort of the peel back the next layer of the onion and figure that data out. But then you have a state like Michigan, where the opposite is true. You have the highest infection rate in the country right now in Michigan, and And what you're seeing is very good compliance with social distancing and very good, very few restaurant diners eating at restaurants. So that proxy is, is correct behavior. Doing pretty good with vaccinations. But why are they the highest in the country? And so this is, peel back the onion a little bit further and figure out what's the next step, and how is that going to evolve over the next few weeks as the efficacy of the vaccine takes hold in the people that have received their second shot.
Yeah, actually, Neil, I on the basis of that thinking, I understand you're now working closely with the CDC-funded Global Health Crisis Coordination Center on issues like designing the best messages to optimize uptake of vaccines across the United States specifically, I think. Is that accurate?
Yeah, right now we're focused on the United States. In some of our other work, we're focused on Canada and globally, but on that, it's in the United States. That's correct. I'm sorry. Yes, originally we used the word hesitancy. I've never particularly liked the word hesitancy as it applies to vaccines. And I think this might sort of complement what Michael was saying. We prefer to use the word vaccine deliberation. It's a more accurate phrase. We feel properly represents the autonomy of the individual and the wide range of reasons in different states, in different social economic cohorts, in different at-risk communities. People deliberate over whether or not to take a vaccine based on a whole range of reasons. They deliberate over whether or not they feel comfortable going out to a movie, going out to a restaurant for different reasons, which are, in my view, the sort of the lead indicators. We say in public health that vaccination moves at the speed of trust. I'd suggest to you that that the rebound moves at the speed of trust as well, right? So just to I guess highlight what Michael's saying, it's highly variable, and you do need to look at a range of data sets, including deliberation, including restaurant reservation data, but also future projected behavior, the degree to which someone feels comfortable making a certain reservation, doing something out of state as well as in state.
Actually, thank you. Michael, that's, I know we were joking about you not being an equities analyst, but I think that's a good segue into your take on perhaps the movie theaters and, where an example of a market where the vaccine or COVID recovery is not yet baked into the market.
Right.
What you've been seeing.
Right. I mean, the movie theater operator market is a tough one. You have AMC that's teetering on or close to a dangerous balance sheet position, and then you have companies like Cinemark that are larger, in many people's eyes, better run organizations. And Cinemark and AMC are both way down, and they haven't caught up from, they haven't seen really much of a bump at all from the COVID recovery, from the vaccination news. And there's demand. We saw with the Godzilla versus King Kong release that there is demand. There are people that want to go back to movies. There's some surveys that show that maybe they don't want to go back so fast, but if we're planning on hitting 70% or more vaccination rate in the United States by the summertime, right, then shouldn't that start to get priced into the market? Shouldn't there be an expectation that there's some sort of recovery there? And I know it's a complicated space. There's a lot of things going on in movie theater operators, and Cinemark has a heavy Latin American presence as well. And Latin America is doing, aside from we spoke about Chile. Chile is doing a great job with vaccination, but Latin America is doing a below global standard job on vaccination rates. So whether that impacts Cinemark substantially or not, I think that they have 3/4 of their theaters or something like that are in the United States. So we'll have to see, but I would have an expectation that we will see some some changes in some of these movie stocks as the occupancy restrictions of right now. It's in New York. I live in New York. It's 25% occupancy in a movie theater, and the movie theaters have gone from having 200 seats to now having 80 seats because they put in the luxury seats. So you had a restriction. You had already a change in the way the revenue. Raise the prices, make it a more luxury experience, but now it's being cut down to 25% occupancy, whereas restaurants are at 50% in some states, higher. In some states, some states have no restriction anymore. And so that data is it's a little hard to understand why the regulations are so strict, and then a little hard to understand why the stock prices haven't reacted in a different way.
Yeah, that's a great point. We had briefly discussed Japan too. I can't remember, was it Neil or Michael that said 30% of the population, only 30% wants to get vaccinated? Is that accurate?
Yeah, there's quite a bit of historical hesitancy. What is the term, Neil? The deliberation.
I'm using deliberation. Yeah.
There's quite a bit of deliberation around the vaccines in Japan, and it's we saw, I think it was yesterday, that we saw that for the Olympics, they're only allowing Japanese residents to go to the Olympics, and so they're fully planning on having the Olympics. The figures that I read were that the potential loss was $30 billion if they don't do the Olympics. But without a really strong vaccination program, there are unknown risks with that event happening this summer.
Yeah, I mean, Alex and Michael, that's a great example of just how global in orientation this phenomenon is. I was in Japan in November 2017, meeting with government officials, clients, partners, and I reflected on how much Japan had invested in advertising for what was then the 2020 Olympics in terms of nation branding, telling the world that Japan's economy had diversified, welcoming immigration, not being so reliant on Chinese tourism. And today we see these phenomena for a wide range of policy reasons. Japan sort of insists on domestic trials, clinical and safety trials, even if they've been deemed efficacious in different countries. And so when it comes to Japan, the question for me is, tourism and supporting that elderly population with immigration. And these are the sorts of issues that we need to look at globally if we're to understand the resilience of certain economies that depend on tourism.
That's a perfect conclusion almost for all of us. Is there anything, Michael, any last points you would like to make to the audience and Neil before we conclude here?
No, I think the one thing that I would say is that there are a lot of unknowns in this market, and we are pulling data from sources that we had previously pulled data from and with expectations, and now we're combining those data sets with new data sets, and getting requests to pull data that we had never thought about pulling in the past, because there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but unfortunately there's a bit of a black hole as to what we're going to experience and how fast we're going to get there.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Neil?
Just to say, this is a complex dynamic situation. We have to be sensitive to equities and names that are undervalued in the current context, but we also have to be sensitive to optimism bias, or the optimism fallacy that Daniel Kahneman and Emil Tversky talked about. That we have a desire and a want to see things rebound very quickly, but sometimes public health sort of moves slowly, and we have to confront those realities if we want to be what the finance industry often refers to as bias aware.
That's very well said. Yeah. So if anybody wants to request a meeting with Sequentum or RIWI, there will be a button after this, which please request a meeting, find out some more from these wonderful companies. Thank you very much, both of you.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks,
Best wishes from Toronto. Thank you.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe.